Hello and welcome back to the Best Available Podcast. This is episode 5. We are trying something new for you guys that are watching the video part of this podcast. We are trying to just record via Zoom and not go through what we have been going through. So hopefully it works out. Let us know down below in the comments. We got one comment from a fan actually a couple weeks ago, and his name is Glenn Denegris, and his comment was Isles in 5. And he was not correct about that. So sorry, Glenn. Better luck next time. It took him 7 games, but we're not talking about hockey today. Maybe next week. But today is part 2 of our NFL preview. And part 1, which you guys should go check out. We talked about all of the AFC teams, all 16 teams in the 4 divisions, and today we will be doing the same. But for the NFC, we're not going to waste any time. We're going to get right into it. East, North, South, West, and we're going to start in the East. The big storyline here, I think, revolves around the Dallas Cowboys. They are, once again, the favorite to win this division, although they've been the favorite in the past, and they, for whatever reason, they just have not put it together as often as they should have. On paper, this is a very talented team with a new head coach and a new defensive coordinator, one of the better quarterbacks in the entire league, a lot of talent on offense, a pretty solid defense. There's questions on the back end, but Matt, this is a very good team. They're a Super Bowl hopeful. I think depending on where you go, they're in the top 5, top 7 for Super Bowl odds. We've seen this happen before with Dallas, where they have a lot of expectations coming into the season. They just don't meet them. They go 8-8, 9-7. But I really think this might be the year that Dallas finally puts it all together and makes a deep run in January.
I mean, I would hope so for their sake. You kind of look at how this team is structured, and they've been a Super Bowl contender for years, but they just can't seem to put it together for a full 16 games. And we know a couple fans that are going to blame quarterback play or coaching. I am more so going to lean towards Jason Garrett on that regard. But when you have a top 10 quarterback in Dak Prescott, this is going to be, and this is obviously, he's playing for his money right now. He's betting on himself. He went in on this year. You're hopefully going to have Zeke for the full run. Amari Cooper, with all the question marks with him right now in terms of injuries, it's just shaping up, especially with everything that's going on with the Eagles, it's shaping up to be an incredible season for the Cowboys. And I don't understand why Dak Prescott gets so much blame, even though statistically he grades out as a pretty good quarterback, and he's proven it and made some good throws. And not to mention, too, that this team this year is not going to play a first-place schedule. So you're going to have a little bit of an easier ride going into the playoffs. It's really shaping up to be a good year for Dallas. And to be honest, even with the first-year head coach and a quarterback and playing for his money right now in the contract year, this still needs to be the year, right? Because they've had good teams in the past, and it's either losing to, like, Detroit in the playoffs or something, or some other kind of thing, or barely beating Detroit and losing to Green Bay, whatever it was. It's been just disappointment after disappointment. And this window is eventually going to close. You have a lot of money locked up in these guys, and it's got to be sooner rather than later, because Tampa Bay's going all in. You have New Orleans that's still there. Green Bay, who's been the nemesis of Dallas in the playoffs the past, I guess, 5 or so years. But yeah, you got to believe in Dak. This has to be the year you just say he's our guy and just go in and play, because this is one of the better teams in the entire conference, in my opinion.
I like Dak, and as an Eagles fan, it seems like I'm not allowed to like him, but I see this argument all the time from both sides, either, oh, Wentz is all the way up here and Dak is down here, or vice versa. They're pretty similar. They're kind of close. They're in that same tier. They're not Mahomes. They're not Russell Wilson. They're not Lamar Jackson, but they're in that next tier, that tier 2, and that's a good place to be. That doesn't mean you're a bad quarterback. Those kinds of quarterbacks, they'll have a down game here and there. They won't do what, you'd expect them to do, but overall, you look at their entire body of work, they're very talented. They can both do a lot of different things to help your football team, and I think especially once we see some of these older quarterbacks kind of get out of the league, Dak's probably going to be a top 5 quarterback in the NFL sooner rather than later. Whether people want to admit it or not, this is a very talented guy. coming out as a fourth round pick, people kind of thought, oh, he's just a prototypical running quarterback. He might help the Cowboys a little bit, but he's not a long-term answer. But his ability to process the field, quick pre-snap adjustments, kind of just see everything that's going on. It's towards the top of the league in terms of in terms of the quarterbacks in the NFL right now. His ability in that aspect of the game is right at the top. Like, he's very good at that. His accuracy I think is pretty solid. His deep ball is I think pretty solid too. He's a pretty good quarterback. And so I I can understand the hesitation of you don't want to pay this guy a lot of money, like maybe not as much as he's asking for, but still I think it would be very stupid of them to let him walk because my argument all the time with somebody that doesn't like Dak is, well, you think the grass is always greener until it isn't. And it's very hard in the NFL to find a good tier 3 quarterback. So when you have a guy like Dak, I don't understand the want to just get rid of him as fast as possible and bring somebody else in. I hear not even just from this guy either. I hear all the time, oh, if they put Andy Dalton in, nothing would change. They'd be the same team, and it wouldn't. That's just factually incorrect. Dak is I can't state this enough. He's a very, very, very good quarterback, and they don't just grow on trees. We see teams that struggle for years to find even an adequate quarterback. The Cowboys have a very good one. Is he as good as Tony Romo? No, but Romo was an exception. He was elite, and nobody wanted to give him credit for that until the end of his career. But Dak has been a really great replacement for Tony, and I really hope that Dallas, as a neutral fan, I really hope Dallas isn't stupid, and I really hope they don't let him go, because that'd be a very big mistake for that franchise.
Well, people forget, too, he really hasn't been in the league for that long. So to sit there and criticize kind of certain parts of his game, he really hasn't been a starting quarterback for an egregious amount of time compared to some of the guys you're going to compare him to, even to Andy Dalton. I mean, Andy Dalton's been in the league for like twice as long as he has. So to like sit there and critique this guy under a microscope, I get it. You're the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys. It's going to come with the job. But in the same token, you're right, Ryan. Who are you going to get? What's the other option? You got to be thankful for what you have. I mean, as a Patriots fan, I'd love to have Dak Prescott as my quarterback. I mean, no disrespect to Cam Newton, but I think Dak Prescott right now could do more for the team than what Cam Newton can. And I think a lot of NFL teams would say the same thing. I mean, yeah, he's going to make mistakes, but Drew Brees makes mistakes too. I mean, obviously at a lesser level, but you're not going to get just a perfect. I think a lot of Cowboys fans are searching for Troy Aikman, and you're just not going to get him. You're not going to get Roger Staubach. You're not going to get Troy Aikman. And even Tony Romo, he kind of went under the microscope, but stop searching for Aikman. It's not going to happen. You don't have Emmitt Smith there. You don't have all these guys. Michael Irvin. It's a new team. And I just, and granted too, that's really the last time the Cowboys were at that level of prominence was with Aikman. So you can't blame these fans for wanting that same kind of thing, right, Ryan? This argument makes sense because that's the last thing they saw of them being in like a Super Bowl contention kind of thing, because Romo would bring them to the playoffs every once in a while, and Prescott has too, but they can't put it together to get past the divisional round. And I just, you got to stop hanging on to the 90s, Cowboys fans. Like, it's a new era, and I don't know what it is with Dak Prescott, but he should be the guy. I'm very high on him. I was high on him last year too, Ryan. He saved me a couple times in fantasy football. So last season obviously didn't end the way anyone wanted to, and I get that, but I think there's more people to blame than just Dak. But Andy Dalton, don't even start me with that argument, because you just pull up his tape from the Bengals over the last couple of years, and that's all you need to see on Andy Dalton.
They have a pretty favorable schedule. We'll get to the next team in a second, but so they have a Week 10 bye. Taking a look at their schedule, you have to travel to Seattle in Week 3. That should be a very fun matchup. But, I mean, other than that, you have the divisional matchup with the Eagles. I think it's, as long as health permitting and things go the way they're supposed to, I see 6 or 7 wins here heading into the Week 10 bye, and that's going to be a very good place to be for this team. Especially coming out of the bye, they have some tough matchups. They have to go on the road to Minnesota, on the road to Baltimore. They have to play San Francisco at home, and then they play the Eagles again, which is always tough. But as you brought it up, they have a relatively easy schedule because they finished second place in the division last year. I find it hard to believe that this team isn't going to get a pretty high seed in the NFC, and if they do that, I think it's hard. It would be hard to bet against them come the playoffs, just with the amount of talent that they have.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're going to have to see what McCarthy brings to the table as a coach, but I think that clean slate's going to help. Obviously, people are going to bring up how McCarthy only won one Super Bowl with Aaron Rodgers, but again, who else were you going to get to come in and handle that media and microscope in Dallas? I think McCarthy's the right guy for the job. The schedule's there. The Baltimore game, I think, is going to be a real mile marker test for this Dallas team to sit there and say, can we contend against the league's best? Because you don't really get something like that. The game at Seattle, I don't really count because it's week 3. That's going to be probably the biggest test for this team, is at Baltimore on a national stage on Thursday Night Football, to sit there and say, hey, can we really play with the best of them? Because other than that, I mean, as you said, Ryan, it's a favorable schedule. So you, as a Cowboys fan, one should be positive for this team in this season because all the pieces are there. And it's not like they're the Eagles, which is probably the next team you're going to bring up, where half the team's injured. I mean, you have everyone there and healthy for the most part, and the core's back from the previous year. It's setting you up to hopefully win the division, which they probably should have last year.
We're going to move on to the team that will probably compete with Dallas for the NFC East throne, and it's the Philadelphia Eagles, the team that won the division last year at 9-7. Of course, they won the Super Bowl in 2017, putting up a 13-3 record. They take a step back in 2018, putting up only 9 wins and 7 losses, but they did win the wild card game in Chicago before bowing out in the divisional round against the Saints. And this past year, they did lose in the wild card round to Seattle when a very old Josh McCown was tasked with leading them back, and you're just not going to win in the playoffs if that's the case. But this is going to be a difficult year, I think, for Philadelphia. They fired their offensive coordinator, Mike Groh, but they didn't really replace him. They kind of have a committee now. They brought in Rich Scangrello. They brought in Marty Mornhinweg. Ultimately, Doug Peterson calls the plays, but still, that's something that people, I think, will have to keep an eye on to see how that kind of dynamic is working within the organization. They have, on paper, a very tough schedule. They have to play San Francisco, Pittsburgh, Baltimore. They play Dallas twice, Seattle, Green Bay, New Orleans, Arizona. This is obviously it's a first place schedule, but still, it's not going to be easy, especially with the question marks that they already have entering the season. Offensive line is now a big question mark. Of course, Brandon Brooks is out for the year. Jason Peters, who was signed to replace Brandon Brooks, now has to move over to left tackle because Andre Dillard is out for the year and Matt Pryor wasn't looking very good. So that's kind of an issue. Jalen Reagor, their first-round pick, who was kind of brought in to help make their offense a little more dynamic and faster than it was past couple seasons. He is now injured. He'll be out for a few weeks. So now you're going to be relying on a 30-plus-year-old Deshaun Jackson. You're going to be relying on some unproven guys, like a second-year guy, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. You'll be relying on rookies in Hightower and Watkins. You still have Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert as your tight end, so I'd imagine they're going to run a lot of 2 tight end sets, which they did last year. I think they were the top team for that, but I don't know, Matt. As an Eagles fan, I'm not too optimistic heading into the season. They did improve the secondary by bringing in Darius Slay. This is probably the best cornerback that they've had in a while. They have still probably one of the better defensive lines, I'd say, in football, but man, I don't know. Maybe I'm just higher on the Cowboys than I should be, and I'm lower on the Eagles than I should be, but this looks like a team that, as it's currently constructed, maybe they go 9-7 again, but it'll be tough this year.
Well, here, talk about 2 stretches during your season. Week 4 through 6, at San Francisco, at Pittsburgh, and then home against Baltimore. Then, week 12 and on, home versus Seattle, at Green Bay, home versus New Orleans, at Arizona, at Dallas. That's a brutal stretch right there against teams that a lot of people are really high on, and not only in terms of just winning their division, but going deep into the playoffs. And that's, in theory, by the time you get to week 12, you're going to probably be healthier than you are now. But it's kind of this running joke right now with the Eagles that they just can't stay healthy. And I don't know what it is. They're like the Yankees of the NFL right now. It's coming into training camp. I mean, even when we were watching the wild card game with all of our friends, Ryan, it's, guys were exiting left and right. Obviously, Wentz got hurt. McCown comes in. I couldn't name you half the players on the Eagles by the time we were watching that game in early January. And coming into camp and everything, players started going down. And I guess, and you kind of called out Eagles fans or Philadelphia fans in general on the last podcast, but this is a year where I kind of wouldn't be so hard on the team because you look at the schedule and then you look at kind of what you're going with into the season in terms of injuries. It's going to be rough, Ryan. I think if the Eagles are going to make the playoffs, you got to take advantage of that top half of the schedule, weeks 1 through 8, because after that, this is like you're going, and you could even include the game at the Browns too. It's just not. You got to hope Wentz is healthy. You got to try and find him another offensive weapon. I mean, I get you have the tight ends, but with Rager being hurt, Deshaun Jackson's just not really going to be the answer. So you got to hope your number 1 overall pick in fantasy, Miles Sanders, you got to hope that he's kind of going to be the answer in terms of the running game too. So it'll be a coin toss for sure with the Eagles team, because on years when we've doubted them, they've won like 13-3 and won the division. And in years when they have the expectations, they go 9-7 and barely scrape it in. So it'll be interesting for sure living in the area. I don't know what to expect. I don't know who's going to be healthy by November. So that's the big indicator.
There's so many good teams in the NFC this year, and we'll talk about all of them, obviously. It's just, even with the expanded playoffs, I think people should be aware that it's a realistic possibility, especially if the health issues continue, that this team doesn't make it to the playoffs for the first time since 2016. It's just, this is a very tough schedule for a very talented team. And the Eagles, on paper, they have some guys on both sides of the ball, but I don't know. Normally, I'd like to be pretty optimistic about the Eagles. I'm like, I think that the coaching staff can get these guys to what they need to do, but especially in a year like this, I think it's just going to be so difficult, especially with the offensive line the way that it is. I think it's just going to be so difficult for them to be as good as it seems like people in this city think that they're going to be. I mean, I hear people saying 11, 12 wins. They're going to make a deep run.
With this schedule?
I just don't see it. Listen, that's fine. They won a Super Bowl a couple years ago. You're not going to be good every year, right? Some years are just
Ryan, you're sounding like the people you called out the other day.
No, listen, I'm not saying. Listen, I'm not okay with losing, but I think people need to understand. You need to temper your expectations a little bit with this team. This isn't the team that they had even 2 years ago in 2018 when they went 9-7. That team was talented too. I think people need to kind of understand that this isn't a 12-win team. And listen, I hope I can listen back to this in December when they're like 10-2 and they're on the road to like a top seed in the NFC. But I don't know. I just don't see it. Listen, I hope they make the playoffs. I love watching my Eagles play in January, regardless of what happens. But this is just going to be a very tough year, and I just hope that people are aware of that.
Remember the last time they went 10-2 and we're going into December. That was when Wentz got hurt the first time at LA. So it's it'll be interesting to see for sure. You don't really know what to expect with this team, but so I'm rooting for Sean Bradley, our guy. So it'll be Sean Bradley, 609 represent from Rancocas Valley. He's on the team, made the roster. So I'll pull for him, and I'll pull for, God forbid too that this team has any kind of COVID tests that come back. That could really put a hinder on the roster, because I can't imagine that the NFL is going to kind of pause an entire team. They're going to kind of go with just fill guys in, practice squad, but you're calling up half the practice squad at this rate, Ryan, to fill in. I mean, I'm looking at the depth chart. I mean, obviously, this is just off of ESPN. You have one offensive lineman that's the backup for 3 different positions, Nate Herbig. So, I mean, the injuries are going to come, but we'll see how the cookie crumbles for this team this year for sure.
The final 2 teams in the NFC East will not compete for the division title. They're in a way different stage than the Cowboys and the Eagles to an extent. It's the Giants and the Washington football team. Both teams, they're starting to kind of get talent in there, but it's still going to take a while. The Giants, you have Danny Dimes here. We're going to see if he can take another step forward. You still have Saquon there. They're trying to revamp that offensive line, which they've needed to do for a while. They're trying to get pieces on both sides of the ball. I think their offense it's kind of looking pretty talented with the guys that I mentioned. You have a pretty good receiver group in Shepard, Darius Slayton, Evan Ingram, and Golden Tate still there. So I think that could be a sneaky good offense. The defense, you still need a few pieces there, but they're kind of building. Washington, on the other hand, new head coach in Ron Rivera. You get Jack Del Rio in there as well. You have Dwayne Haskins in his second year, so we'll see if he can take a step forward. They obviously released Adrian Peterson, so they feel pretty highly about the guys that they do have on their roster, like Antonio Gibson, like Bryce Love. You have a pretty good wide receiver in Terry McLaurin, who I'm excited to see if he can prove that last year, wasn't a fluke, if he can actually do that consistently year over year. The defense obviously has some good pieces, which as an Eagles fan, I'm worried about for week 1, considering the state of our offensive line. But they're in a different spot. Those fan bases, obviously, they shouldn't expect too much. Even with 7 teams making the playoffs, those 2 teams aren't going to be one of them. Maybe in a year or 2, we can start to talk about that. But right now, they're just trying to develop their young talent and get as much young talent in there as possible, I think.
Well, Danny Dimes put on 20, 25 pounds of muscle. He's going to look shredded in those Brooks Brothers shirts on Sunday mornings. New York's definitely in a better position than Washington to make moves. I will say Washington, I think, made the much better coaching hire in Ron Rivera. I mean, I like Joe Judge as much as the next guy, but Ron Rivera is a guy that is revered among the NFL community, who I think kind of got the short end of the stick towards the tail end of that time in Carolina. Kind of had to deal with a lot. I think he's going to turn that franchise around. Obviously, they're bringing in a lot of new people to try and fix not only the branding, but also the product on the field as well. New York, I think, is a year or 2 away, depending on how they attack free agency in the draft. This year is definitely going to be the growth year for them. So I think Giants fans are going to be potentially playing spoiler for the 2-horse race at the top of the division, not in terms of competing with Dallas and Philadelphia, but in terms of stealing a win or 2 to kind of force another team to kind of come in there and win that division. So they'll be competitive for sure, especially offensively. I think the weapons are there in the first full season for Daniel Jones to be the guy. So there's the defense might need a little work still, but they'll be competitive, more so than Washington.
So that was our discussion on the NFC East. We'll move now to the North, and we'll start with the team that won the division a year ago, and that was the Green Bay Packers. They put up 13 wins, 3 losses, just a year after going 6-10. So quite the improvement. People kind of thought that they would get better by bringing in a new head coach, Matt LaFleur, finally getting rid of Mike McCarthy, but I don't think anybody, well, I'm not going to say, that, because there were some people that thought they were going to make a big jump, but the smart money was not on them going from 6 to 13 wins. It seemed like everything kind of went right for them. Of course, obviously, they did not parlay that success into their first Super Bowl appearance in a long time, but you could kind of see that there was something positive brewing in Green Bay for the first time in a few years. They won 10 wins. They had 10 wins in 2016. Then they fell to 7-6, and finally they get to 13 last year. The draft was a little controversial for the Packers. You have an older quarterback that you want to try to keep that window open as long as possible. So naturally, what you do is you take a quarterback in the first round. Now, they did take A.J. Dillon in the second round, and they took a tight end, Joseph DeGuara from Cincinnati, in the third round. But I think you're kind of hoping, if you're not only Aaron Rodgers, but you're a Packers fan in general, that you kind of bring in some offensive weapons for your aging quarterback. They didn't do that. You take a look at how this team is constructed. They're not going to win 13 games this year. The schedule, it's not super tough. You have to play New Orleans, Tampa Bay, San Francisco. Indy will be a tough one, but I don't know. I think that people seem to be a little higher on this team than I personally am. I could see them maybe getting 9 or 10 wins, I think would be fair. I think 10 might be pushing it just a little bit. And listen, that might be enough for the playoffs. Depending on how the Vikings do, that might even be enough to win that division. But I don't know. I'm not as high on the Packers as a lot of people seem to be. I know they have some talent on offense. You still have Devontae Adams there. I think Aaron Jones probably regresses a little bit, which is fine. I think that's to be expected, and that's fair. The defense, they're kind of starting to get some pieces there, but man, I don't know. With Aaron Rodgers, obviously you can never count anything out of the realm of possibility, but it seems like last year was probably their year to try to make a run, and they couldn't take advantage of it.
Well, especially against a team in the NFC Championship game that a lot of people really didn't see being there in the 49ers, a team that won a lot of close games. And they really weren't really competitive in that game for a big stretch of time either, the Packers. Yeah, you look at the offensive depth chart, Ryan, it's not good. I mean, it's almost insulting in a way, right? Because you're spoiled to be able to go from Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers. But now you've only been to one Super Bowl with Aaron Rodgers in terms of winning one. And just in terms of playoff defeats, I mean, it's kind of disappointing in a way, right? Because you go from one perennial great to another, but you look at this team this year, it's like Aaron Jones, Devontae Adams, but then it's like Equanimeous St. Brown and like Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Like, really? You look at what Drew Brees has, who's kind of in the same career arc, obviously a little bit older, but Drew Brees has a lot of weapons. He has Michael Thomas. He has Alvin Kamara. Aaron Rodgers is probably feeling a little pissed off that he doesn't have these kind of weapons. And I get in some regards that you got to prepare for the future, Ryan. You got to get Jordan Love, but Jordan Love wasn't even, he was a very controversial quarterback in the draft too. A lot of people were not as high on him as others, and he kind of surged through late on the draft boards leading up to it. Yeah, I don't know. I think they're the de facto favorites in this division. They should be. I don't put Minnesota too far behind them though. I don't even necessarily put teams like Detroit and Chicago out of the question either. I mean, not in terms of winning division, but in terms of not having them go 13-3. Matt LaFleur can only do so much with this team offensively. So I guess if you're a Packers fan, you should really be disappointed. I know a lot of them try to talk themselves into this Jordan Love thing, but if I'm Aaron Rodgers, I mean, I'd be pissed off. Like, this is not, you're not going to win the NFC trying to compete. Just compare them to the other offenses that are in the NFC, Tampa Bay, New Orleans. You're not going to score as many points as them, even Dallas, right, Ryan? I mean, this is just not, and your tight end being Mercedes Lewis, who I'm pretty sure was still in the league when we were in like middle school. So he's been in there for a very, very, very long time. So it's disappointing to see kind of this career arc of Rodgers get to the point where you just have like a glorified practice squad in some regards. You have Devontae Adams, but have Aaron Jones, but just a lot of question marks to me. So they might de facto win the division, but outside of that, not much. First round exit.
The Vikings will probably give them a run for their money. I don't know. This division is pretty interesting. It's because of, as you said, these teams are a lot closer together than I think people give them credit for. That's not me saying that Detroit's going to come out and win 10 games and win the North, but these teams are all going to be competitive to some degree, so it's going to be a very intriguing division to watch. And if you want to read about it, David Austin Guest wrote a very great preview over at bestavailableplayer.com about the North, and he said the same thing. But you look at this Vikings team, they lost some big pieces. You lost Xavier Rhodes, you lost Trey Waynes, you lose Mackenzie Alexander, you lose Linval Joseph. That's a lot of snaps that you're losing on the defensive end. In a year like this where continuity is so important, it's going to be a little difficult to replace guys like that. Even on the offensive end, you're counting on a rookie receiver in Justin Jefferson to contribute almost immediately. The good thing for them is the guys that they still do have are very good. You still have a pretty solid safety duo. You have some nice linebackers. Your defensive line is pretty good. You have Dalvin Cook, who, when he's healthy, is one of the best running backs in the entire league. Adam Thielen, who people have finally accepted as one of the better wide receivers in the NFL. You have a pretty solid tight end duo in Kyle Rudolph and Irv Smith Jr. They've tried to address the offensive line in recent years for the first time in what seems like forever, which is something that they needed to do. Ultimately, even as a run-heavy team, it's going to come down to what Kirk Cousins is able to do with the Vikings. As if he doesn't make mistakes, as long as he kind of just keeps things manageable, he keeps things in control, this is a team that could win the division. But if they start having to rely on him to win football games for them, it probably won't be a very good season for Minnesota, because you don't want to have to rely on Kirk Cousins to win you multiple football games in a season.
But Ryan, I don't, you're going to think I'm crazy. I don't think the situations are too different from what Rodgers has to deal with in Green Bay. Green Bay has the quarterback and not really much else. Minnesota offensively kind of has everything except the execution from the quarterback position. And I think I would bank more on Kirk Cousins' ability to at least be a competent person more times than the Green Bay offense to give Rodgers the tools he needs to win football games. I mean, going out and getting Ngakoue is going to help for Minnesota, at least to say, hey, like we tried to replace some of these guys we lost. I mean, I agree. This team's got a lot of question marks just as much as Green Bay. And you said it too. We could say the same thing about every team in this division, but it helps them that they play inside. It helps them that you have at least a controlled environment for a guy in Kirk Cousins who's been so erratic during his career. It's not unrealistic to say that they'll be right there at the end with Green Bay. I don't think it's unrealistic at all. And Kirk Cousins, he's going to get you to stats. I mean, obviously we're in a stat-driven league, but you still have to make the throws to win the division. And I don't see how it's too different from Green Bay, in my opinion. There's no redeeming factor about either team to sit there and say, well, this Green Bay is exponentially better because they have Rodgers. Well, they don't have anyone there. And it's the opposite for Minnesota, in my opinion. So I think Dalvin Cook's going to have a career year. I think not having Diggs is going to be a bit of an adjustment for Kirk Cousins. He came in to Minnesota and had him plus Thielen plus Cook. He had a lot more accessibility with the offense. So with him not being there, it's going to be a bit of an adjustment for sure to not take the top off the defense like that so Thielen could get balls underneath. So I'm interested to see how they restructure the offense for sure.
I want to talk about Detroit before Chicago, because this Detroit team, for me, I've really come around on them in recent days. They seem very intriguing. Matt Patricia, his first year there were some things coming out that he wasn't setting a good culture. He was berating guys, this and that. It seems like that's kind of settled down a little bit, which I think is good, but this is probably the most talented roster that he's had in his time as the head coach of this team. They completely revamped their secondary over the course of the offseason. They did lose Darius Slay, but you bring in Desmond Trufant, you draft Jeff Okudah, you trade for Duron Harmon, and moving just to the defense in general, you brought in Trey Flowers earlier, and then this offseason you bring in Jamie Collins. You have Jared Davis, who's proven himself to be a pretty solid linebacker, good young linebacker. On offense, There's a lot of intriguing names. The wide receiver duo of Marvin Jones and Kenny Galladay, I think, is criminally underrated because they play for Detroit. TJ Hawkinson, I think, is a great young tight end that's ready to take that next step this year. The running back duo of Kerryon Johnson, DeAndre Swift, and now Adrian Peterson is added into that mix. That's a nice little trio to have. Not for fantasy owners, maybe, but in terms of just being able to dispose different guys as a head coach, I think that's a really nice luxury to have, having those three guys. And then Matt Stafford comes back. Hopefully he's fully healthy because when he is healthy, he is one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL. He's in that tier 2, tier 3 range, which as we've said, that's not necessarily a bad place to be. That's fine. They bring in a new defensive coordinator. He was the Eagles defensive backs coach for a while, Corey Unlin. I'm excited to see what this Lions team can do this year. I don't know if it'll all culminate in a playoff appearance. I don't know if they can kind of sneak in and get that 7 seed, but I really think that this team could surprise some people this year in a good way. I'm really excited to see what they can do.
Well, yeah, you talk about the additions defensively. It's basically half the Patriots defense from 2 years ago that kind of came over. And I mentioned this on Sunday. The amount of respect that Brian Flores gets to see all the guys from New England come down to him, it's just as equal going out to Detroit, right? Looking at their defense, Danny Shelton comes over. Danny Shelton had a really good season with the Patriots. Trey Flowers, another guy who I absolutely loved, and I was really sad when he went to Detroit. Jamie Collins had this resurgent year last year in New England. Obviously, Duron Harmon, I think, is a really good addition to this team, in a criminally underrated safety in the league, Duron Harmon, a guy who really can make a play. And he wasn't even a starting safety on the Patriots, but he always came in and made big plays when they needed to. I think you gave a little too much praise in some regards to the running back core. I think this is something for whatever reason this franchise has not been able to solve since Barry Sanders. I don't know why. I just doesn't seem to really mesh in my head about how this team just can't find, not necessarily a dominant running back, but just something that you can bank on, not only in terms of a fantasy football thing, but in terms of just saying, hey, he's the running back in Detroit. Like, I bet the casual NFL fan is not going to know Kerryon Johnson as opposed to Alvin Kamara.
Well, people thought that was going to be DeAndre Swift, but then out of nowhere, the Lions said, you know what, we're going to bring in AP.
Well, that's why I don't understand that. I mean, as a mentor thing, I guess, or just because they had the cap space and wanted to do it, that's why it gives me, a question mark to sit there and say, well, maybe they know something we don't. Maybe Swift doesn't look as good as we thought he was going to be. So the jury's still going to be out on that for me until it actually happens in terms of a running back that could actually do it and stay healthy for the full 16 games. I agree with the receiving core, though. I think Detroit could play with the best of them in that division. I really can. I mean, I'll say it again. Outside of the Aaron Rodgers factor, Ryan, how is this team too much different from the Packers? How? I mean, they have a lot of really good players. I think Matt Patricia gets criticized way too much. People say he's trash, that he's a bad coach. I don't. He's a great football mind. He's literally a rocket scientist. So I just give him more time. I think Detroit will be there also. I really do. They're not too much different from the Packers. Tell me how they're different.
As I said when we started doing this division, this is interesting because these teams are a lot closer than people make them out to be. It's not just Green Bay, Minnesota, and a bunch of trash. You could make the case for all these teams to make a run and maybe not necessarily win the division in some cases, but make the playoffs in general. I think this is going to be a very fun division to watch. You look at the Lions' schedule, the one thing they're going to need to do, they're going to need to try to bank as many wins as they can early on, because at the end of the season, it's probably the toughest stretch of their season. You have Chicago on the road. That's always a tough ask. You have Green Bay at home. That's the final meeting for those two teams. Away at Tennessee, home against Tampa Bay, Week 16. That's a tough matchup to have late in the season. most likely, and then Minnesota at home to end the season. Now, they do have 3 of their final 4 games at home, which, especially in a year like this, that'll be definitely much appreciated. But if they could bank maybe, so they have a very early week 5 bye, but let's say if by week 12, their Thanksgiving game, if they could bank like maybe 4 or so wins, 4 or 5 wins, maybe 6 if they're lucky, they'll probably be in a good position to make a run at the playoffs, I think.
Well, they have a tough stretch to begin the season. 2 divisional games, one of which being at Lambeau. Then you go to Arizona, and then New Orleans right before your bye. That's a tough ask for a team that doesn't have expectations but should. I think it's there. I don't. I mean, coming out of the bye, you have Jacksonville, Atlanta, home against Indy, which I still, even with as high as we are on the Colts, I think that's a little bit of a closer matchup than we think. So Detroit, I think Detroit has a chance. I really do, especially as you said, the expanded postseason. I don't see why not. They've done it in the past. They've snuck in with that 6 seed before they've expanded to 7, but they've snuck in there a couple times with that last spot.
The final team in this division that we're going to talk about is the Bears. So their defense obviously isn't as good as it was a couple of years ago, but it's still probably one of the better units overall in football. I don't know if signing Robert Quinn to the deal that they signed him to was necessarily the best use of their money, but that's why I'm talking on a podcast and they're in the front office. The big question on the offensive side, obviously, is the quarterback position. They're going to try Mitchell Trubisky, it seems like, one more time. And then if that doesn't work, I guess they'll try to let Foles. I don't know. I was a little surprised that Foles could not win the starting job over Trubisky. Apparently, from what I was reading, Foles he didn't look very good. I mean, apparently neither of them looked very good, but Foles did not look as good as they thought he would. We talk about how if you're like even if you have a tier 3 quarterback, you can still find success in the NFL, but the Bears don't even have that. They just have a dumpster fire right now. And I hate to say that because, obviously they're both very good guys, it seems like. It's just if Mitch can actually take a step forward, because we've seen flashes from Trubisky over the years. I think people kind of like to write that off, but we've seen when he's on, his deep ball is pretty good. He can kind of scan the field a little bit. He can move around when he's on. It's just that doesn't happen as much as he'd like it to out of a guy that you took, number 2 overall a few years ago. It's just, I don't know. I think it's very realistic that this team finishes last in the division. I think, as we keep saying, it's also possible that they surprise people and finish higher in this division than people expect them to. But they're going to somehow need to get good quarterback play from somebody. I don't care if they have to do it by committee. I don't care if they start Mitch one game and then Foles the next game, but they got to try to find it somewhere because, I mean, they have solid offensive weapons. You have Allen Robinson. You have Anthony Miller, who's a really good wide receiver. I think people are finally going to realize that this year. Tariq Cohen and David Montgomery, that's a nice little duo to have in the backfield. The offensive line's not like too bad, but ultimately it's going to come down to the quarterback. And that's how it has to be.
Yeah, the Foles trade didn't really make sense to me, Ryan. I would have thought, if anything, you would draft a quarterback to really make a push. Because at this stage in Nick Foles' career, how much is he really going to challenge for a starting job? You saw how quickly he lost it to Minshew after his injury, and he never really got it back in Jacksonville. And I don't think the offense they run there makes a lot of sense. They put a lot of faith last year in Trubisky to throw the ball compared to running it in certain situations. There'd be times when he'd be throwing it close to 50 times a game. Mitch Trubisky. This isn't like Drew Brees or Tom Brady. This is Mitch Trubisky. Throwing the ball. No one whose name isn't Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, Drew Brees, and you can make the case for one or two other guys, Ryan, should be throwing the ball that much in an NFL game. Especially when you have a guy in David Montgomery and Tariq Cohen who are both capable guys, in my opinion. They're going to get you yards, and Obviously, the scheming of the offense got a lot of criticism last year too for Matt Nagy, and I just you load up on tight ends, you load up on this backup quarterback in Foles who didn't look good in training camp. Doesn't make sense, right? Because this team had such a legendary defense a couple of years ago, and you were never going to keep those guys there just because of money. It happened in Jacksonville too. We talked about that a couple of days ago. So you have a lot of your money locked up there, but if Trubisky can't figure this out by like week 9, you got to kick him to the curb and just punt and go for the draft and take a quarterback, because I don't see it. I think Nagy deserves part of the blame for all these kind of poor situations that Trubisky was put in too. I don't think it's solely on him, in my opinion.
I think that's fair to say. I don't know. I'm going to say the same thing again. This is going to be an interesting division to watch this year. I agree with Nagy. I don't know. It seems like he thinks he's better than everybody else because of that 1 year that he had. I think it's very realistic that they try to go in a different direction if things don't go well this year. I think they probably give him the axe and try to bring somebody else in, but we'll just have to wait and see. He's definitely on the hot seat. I think that's fair to say, but we're going to fly on down south now. If you're Matt, you're going to take a train down south, and we're going to go to the NFC South, and we'll start with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Of course, they added arguably the greatest quarterback of all time in Tom Brady. They trade for Rob Gronkowski, and then they draft Tristan Wirfs, who will be starting on the offensive line this year as a rookie. They also draft Antoine Winfield Jr. with their second-round pick. This is it'll be tough for them to win the division. I think it would be shocking if they don't make the playoffs. But you take a look at how this team is constructed. Probably the best wide receiver duo in football with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. And then you have Tyler Johnson, a rookie who will probably get some snaps there too. The offensive line is pretty solid. You know, maybe especially with the quarterback that you have behind it, you maybe would like it to be a little better, but I think it'll get them through the season. I don't know what Rob Gronkowski has left in the tank. It's a good thing they still have O.J. Howard in case Gronk doesn't look like he used to, but as of right now, we'll see if he can kind of make it through 16 games. I think that's a big ask for a guy that hasn't been in the league for a while, but I don't know. Maybe he could surprise me. It seemed like Ronald Jones was set to be the starting running back until they signed Leonard Fournette. So now he'll be getting snaps there as well. The defense it's a pretty good unit. I think you have talent at all levels. I think 10 wins is probably pretty fair. You know, maybe they get to 11-2. I mean, you look at the schedule. They play New Orleans twice in the first 9 weeks. They play Kansas City week 12, but I mean, other than that, this is a pretty modest schedule. There's a lot of winnable games here, especially early on. I could definitely see a situation where even if they lose week 1 to New Orleans, they bank a lot of wins very, very quickly, and they're in a good position at the end of the season. I think if you're a Buccaneers fan, obviously you don't know how long the window's open. Brady, he signed the very short-term deal, so you don't know how long this championship window is going to be open, but you know what the deal is, championship or bust at this point. So we'll see how Brady looks with some actual offensive talent, which he didn't have last year in New England. Maybe that'll help him out a little bit more. We'll see if maybe he throws the ball a little deeper, if they're going to try to, or if Arians is going to just try to keep him throwing it short. But this is an intriguing team, obviously. That sounds like a stupid thing to say, but this is going to be a very intriguing team to see. They're going to be successful, but how successful are they going to be?
We're approaching Eagles' dream team or last year's Browns with this Buccaneers squad. Not to mention, Ryan, in that backfield, you add in LaShawn McCoy on top of Fournette and Ronald Jones. Yeah. So for whatever that's worth, the offensive line is the question mark. Obviously, last year, quarterback play really can't be blamed on the offensive line in a lot of regards just because Winston would just throw the ball anywhere and everywhere. I think this is step one to get Wirfs in there. Obviously, they kind of had to throw something together because you're paying Tom Brady and you're also bringing in a bunch of other guys to give them weapons. So the offensive line is going to take more than just 1 year to build around them. So in terms of draft next year, I think that'll be probably the biggest thing for them to focus on. The defense was one of the best in the league last year, just in terms of collecting. They had the leading sack getter in Shaq Barrett. You have a bunch of other guys that were pretty good defensively. The issue that they ran into is that they would be on the field almost all the time because Winston will throw a pick and then they'd be pinned in like their own 20-yard line trying to stop a team that's in the red zone because they got a pick on like the first play from scrimmage from Winston. So they don't deserve some of the blame because they would give up points last year. And people forget, without Tom Brady and without all these guys, they were a top 5 offense because Winston threw for over 5,000 yards. So they were able to move the football. And I agree. The schedule's out there. I had them at 11-5 in my preview, Ryan, just because we don't know how long it's going to take for this team to put it together. So some of those losses might come early, but especially towards the middle and later portions of their schedule, it gets really kind of soft. I mean, we don't know what the Falcons are going to be, and we'll probably talk about them soon. You played them twice in your final 3 games. That could be either really good or really bad in terms of having them to end the season. But you look towards the middle of their schedule, Vegas, the Giants, Carolina, the Rams, winnable games all around. So you just have to kind of put it together. I don't think – I'm tempted to say they won't win either game against New Orleans, but I agree. I think they're going to be towards the top of the teams that get a wild card berth and get into the playoffs for sure. It's just, if they were in either of the previous 2 divisions we talked about, they'd be the easy favorite to win that division. But because of where they play and against a Super Bowl favorite in New Orleans, they kind of just get the short end of the stick in that regard.
Yeah, New Orleans, we'll talk about them now. They have the most talented roster in the NFC on paper. They're in the top 3 in the entire league. The Chiefs are obviously very talented. The Ravens are very talented. You could probably throw the 49ers in there too, but the Saints are right at the top for most talented rosters in the league. They've gone 26-6 the past 2 seasons, but you talked about this in your divisional preview, which is over at bestavailableplayer.com. The playoff poise just hasn't been there. 2018, there was obviously the pass interference brouhaha that it seems like Saints fans still hold on to that. And listen, I understand it. If that was a really good chance for them to make the Super Bowl and it screwed them out of it, I get that. But it's been 2 years, guys. I think it's time to let that one go. And then last year, once again, they go 13-3. They don't get the 1 seed, but they do go 13-3, and they lose to the Vikings in the wild card round, which nobody was expecting. I don't know, Matt. I mean, despite all the talent on this team, that's the overall question. It doesn't matter how many games they win in the regular season. They could go 13-3 again. Maybe they only get 10 wins. Until they win in the playoffs and actually live up to the potential, nobody cares. It doesn't matter. And nobody's going to remember this team if they can't get to the Super Bowl. I think it's crazy that with all the talent they've had on the roster the past few years, they haven't even made it to a Super Bowl. Listen, the NFL, I get that. It's tough. That's only 2 teams make it, especially in this sport. It's very tough to get there. You can't, there's certain factors you got to take into consideration, but it just blows my mind. And now you have an aging Drew Brees, who we've seen the past couple years, he fades down the stretch. That's a legitimate concern. He looks great in the first couple months of the season, but once you get into December, once you get into January, he's not the same guy. It ain't going to be any different this year. He's another year older. As I said, they have a lot of talent, but I don't know if you can trust them to get to the Super Bowl based on what we've seen happen the past couple of years. I think that's a big question mark.
Yeah, so they're my Super Bowl team this year. I'm going all in to say it's either now or never, because they haven't won a Super Bowl since 2009, Ryan. Since 2009. We were 12 years old, I think, if that math checks out. We're now in our 20s. And to think that all the talent that came through New Orleans between then and now is crazy to say that this team has not won a Super Bowl since. And I talked about this in the preview too, that you have the talent, the window's going to close. I think it's going to shut at the same time Tampa Bay's shuts, to be honest. So both of these teams are kind of on the clock, but Tampa Bay's just started because they bring in a quarterback that's 43 years old. New Orleans, this has been open since at least we've been in high school because they had a down year or two, whatever. Obviously, the whole Bounty Gate stuff happened, so that kind of impacted some things. But Michael Thomas, you bring in Emmanuel Sanders, Alvin Kamara. The defense has a lot of really good pieces, and they drafted really well on defense, I think, in the past couple of years to bring in guys like Alex Anzalone, who played really well during stretches last year. And I don't know. It's the Minnesota loss. We were celebrating the holiday of one of our friends that he created himself. We won't give him airtime, but we were trying to figure out that score, right? In New Orleans, we weren't watching the game, but we were following the score, and all of a sudden it's like we were going into overtime. I'm like, oh, here we go again with this. But you lost to the Vikings on Wild Card Weekend. This team, pretty much the exact same team, minus like Emmanuel Sanders and a couple other guys. It's just shocking to me. And their window is kind of like the Patriots, but the Patriots have won the Super Bowl within those windows. New Orleans has been there. They've been this sexy pick every year. Sports Illustrated, every kind of magazine or news outlets like the Saints, this is the year they're going to put it together, and they never do. I mean, it's confusing. You have the best wide receiver in the NFL. You have a top 5 running back in the NFL. You have one of the best quarterbacks to ever play in the NFL. You got to do it now or never. And I put the confidence in our picks that are going to come out tomorrow. I was one of the people that had the Saints winning the Super Bowl. I had Sean Payton as coach of the year. I think that this has to be it. Because if not, next year Tampa Bay is going to have a year of Tom Brady under their belt. They're going to have a better offensive line. They're going to improve all kinds of other things. Tampa Bay can overtake them next year. So this has to be the year for New Orleans if they want to really run through the regular season, get into the playoffs, then push all the way to the Super Bowl. So this has to be it.
Another team in the NFC South that's not really met expectations over the past few years has been the Falcons. Everyone knows 28-3. Year after that, they win 10 games and they make the playoffs. They win in Los Angeles Wild Card Weekend. They lose in Philadelphia 15-10 in the divisional round. And they haven't made the playoffs since. They've won 7 games each of the past 2 years. Despite the talent that they've had, this is always the team going into the season that people say, with all this talent, this is finally the year. They're going to come back. They're going to make a run. They're going to surprise everybody. It hasn't happened the past 2 years for a number of reasons. I think they should have fired Dan Quinn a long time ago. They still have him there. I can't quite grasp why they still have him there. I think it's pretty clear that he's not the guy for the job, but they're going to try it one more time, it seems like, to see if he can finally change things, which I don't know why they would have the confidence that he can. But you take a look, the offense, once again, is very talented. The offensive line looks pretty damn good. You have Julio, Calvin Ridley. You bring in Hayden Hurst. You sign Todd Gurley. You sign Todd Gurley. You still have Matt Ryan there, who's been criminally underrated for a very long time. He's still one of the best quarterbacks in football. The defense, once again, will be the big question mark. It just blows my mind that a guy with Dan Quinn's resume and his skill set has not been able to get this defense to be even below average in his time there. It's always been god-awful. And it seems like they're going to try to fix it a little bit this year. You sign Dante Fowler to a big contract. You draft A.J. Terrell out of Clemson. You use your second-round pick on Marion Davidson out of Auburn. I don't know. I'm not going to get caught on this hype train again, Matt. The past 2 years, I've pounded my fist on the table and said they're going to be very good. They're going to be at the top. they're going to make a run. I'm not doing it this year. I've been fooled one too many times before. I'm done. It's over. So I think I see 7-9, and they're in this team's future again, and that's just how it's going to be. Rinse and repeat.
I'm pretty confident in Atlanta's abilities this year.
No, don't do that.
I had them
to
going
yourself.
9-7.
No.
To Dan Quinn's credit, the defense, to your point, did allow like 31 points per game over the first half of the season. But when everything kind of, and this obviously shouldn't be the case, but when everything was like uncertain about his job, like security, they turned it around. They only allowed 18 points per game the rest of the way. So maybe that shows that he just needs the seat really red hot underneath of him to start coaching a defense. I mean, I agree that the track record's not necessarily there. This is a team we talked about, New Orleans, but this core of like Matt Ryan and Julio Jones and some of the guys on defense has been there for a while. And to only have one Super Bowl appearance and have a lot of disappointing seasons, and we're not talking about disappointing playoff exits like New Orleans. This is an Atlanta team that, as you said, just falls flat on their face. If they're not going to make the Super Bowl or look good, they're going to suck, like beyond belief. And they're just a confusing team because the stats from the first half of the season to the second half of the season are completely different last year. I think Todd Gurley is going to really open up this offense. I think he brings something to the table different than what Coleman and Freeman did over the past few years. I think he's going to be a much better addition. The Hayden Hurst addition is going to be really big too. I think he's going to be a little more versatile than Hooper was. I can see 9 wins for this team. I really can. I love the offensive line. I think it hinges, and I think I said this in the article too, hinges on the defense. If the defense can play well and not suck like they did through the first half of the season, I can see the 9 wins or 8 wins, something around that range. Maybe not a playoff berth because the NFC is really good this year. But I could see them being good. But if the defense sucks, that was the X factor I had for them, because if this defense is like it was last year, Quinn's going to be out by midseason. I mean, I give credit to Arthur Blank. He put the confidence in his coach that he could turn it around, and he did last year. They went 6-2 over their last 8, so I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. But if the defense starts to be like it was last year, you got to pull the plug and move on and just start fresh.
A team that did start fresh this offseason was the Carolina Panthers. Basically, this entire team from top to bottom was completely changed. You have a new head coach in Matt Rule, new offensive coordinator in Joe Brady, a new defensive coordinator in Phil Snow. You lose a lot of players of differing skill sets and statures, but Cam Newton, Vernon Butler, Trey Turner, Mario Addison, Luke Kuechly, James Bradbury, Greg Olsen, Gerald McCoy, Dontari Poe, Bruce Irvin, just some of the names that were on the team last year that are no longer on the team. You bring in Teddy Bridgewater. You trade for Russell Okung in that deal with the Chargers that sent Trey Turner there. You bring in Robbie Anderson. You still have Christian McCaffrey, obviously. The offense, I think, will actually be a little better than people are expecting. But overall, I don't think this team is set to be very good. I think 6-10 is probably pretty realistic. And if things go really bad, maybe a little less than that. I love Teddy Bridgewater. I really think that he could be a good quarterback in this league. I'm excited to see what he can do in this offense as a full-time starter for the first time since his gruesome injury so many years ago. I'm excited to see what he can do with Christian McCaffrey. I'm excited to see if Joe Brady can kind of work his magic and maybe get something out of Bridgewater that we haven't seen before. But they're definitely at the end of the NFC South. They're not going to compete for the division. I think someone in our survey said that they might be the most surprising team this year. Now I could see that. It depends on what you define surprising as. Their schedule is not, overly difficult. They have to play the Chiefs, the Bucks, the Saints, and the other two teams in the NFC South, but I don't know. I think that this is clearly a building year for them, and I feel so bad for McCaffrey. They're wasting away his best years, but this is definitely a building year for Carolina. But I will say this. I like the direction they're going, And I think in a couple years, I think they're going to be in a good position, especially once the window for New Orleans and Tampa Bay closes.
Yeah, I mean they have one of the youngest defenses in the NFL in like the past decade. They're really trying to overhaul things. It's going to take a long time. I mean, it's just that's how it's going to be when you change this much, such a short window. That everyone was surprised by the Kuechly retirement, but I agree about McCaffrey, especially with the short lifespan or career lifespan of an NFL running back. He's burning it away right now with the team that's going to go maybe 2-14, 3-13 if they're lucky. It's you have your guy potentially in Bridgewater and McCaffrey, but it's going to take a while. I'm not as sold on Matt Rule as some people are. I need to see that kind of happen first because he's really successful college coach, but I don't know how his style is going to kind of translate just yet, but it's going to take a while. So you just got to be patient if you're a Carolina fan. This is talk about the most successful era in Carolina Panthers history. Ron Rivera, Cam Newton, the defensive guys they had for a long period of time. It's just a whole new thing. Just a whole new era. So it's going to take a while. It doesn't help that they play in the division they do either. So that's going to really help their career development of these young guys, but it's going to really suck for their record. But they're going to get a lot of good draft picks out of it. So they could at least say that. By the way, they spent all 7 of their draft picks on defensive players too. So they're going all in to try and overhaul this defense that for a long time had a lot of older guys. So it'll take some time, but they'll be there eventually when everyone else kind of falls off the cliff in this division.
The final division that we'll talk about in this episode is the NFC West. This is the division that I just wrote a preview for on the website that released today over at bestaavailableplayer.com. Go check it out. This is a very exciting division. There's 3 teams here that I think are going to be really fun to watch. And then there's a team that, So we're going to start with the San Francisco 49ers, the team that made the Super Bowl a season ago. They started off 8-0. They go 13-3. They look very convincing in the divisional round against Minnesota, in the conference championship against Green Bay. They have the lead going into the fourth quarter against the Kansas City Chiefs in the Super Bowl. They played very well for 45 minutes. And then they let up 21 unanswered points. They lose the Super Bowl. And that's how their season ended. But they returned 21 of their 25 starters, which I keep saying it, in a year like this, that continuity factor is huge. I've come around. I've seen the light on the San Francisco 49ers over the past 24 hours. Going into writing that preview, I wasn't super high on them. But now I've kind of come around on them. They're clearly a very talented roster. I've come around on Garoppolo a bit. I don't think he's as good as people make him out to be, but I think that he's good enough, especially with Kyle Shanahan at the helm there in San Francisco. They're not going to win 13 games again, and that's okay. That's fine. They don't need to win 13 games. They're still going to be a very competitive team. They're still going to contend for a Super Bowl. They obviously lost some guys, but they replaced them by trading for Trent Williams from the Washington football team. You draft Javon Kinlaw with the 14th overall pick. You draft Brandon Ayuk with the 25th overall pick, and he just keeps getting a lot of praise from all corners. People are saying, I think I just saw Chris Collinsworth say that he's the best rookie wide receiver he's ever seen. Now, I that might be a little much, but regardless, even the guys that they lost, they were able to fill those gaps immediately. So this is going to be, it should be, health permitting, another very good year for the San Francisco 49ers. They'll have a good chance to win the division, and they'll have a good chance to make a deep run in January and maybe make a Super Bowl again.
You're a little higher on them than I am. They played in a lot of close games last year, whether that's a testament to their poise down the stretch of a game or just the fact that they weren't as good as their record says they are. That's up for debate. I think that, yes, they're talented. Yes, they're going to win a lot of games. Yes, they're probably going to be in the playoffs. but in some ways, I just don't. Because remember last year when they played Ryan and won 13-3, they were playing on like a third place schedule. This wasn't a team that going into last season people thought was going to come onto the scene like they did. And going into this season, obviously, it's going to be a much different thing as a first place schedule, but it doesn't look like a first place schedule, Ryan. When you really kind of look at it, I mean, you get lucky in the sense that you're playing the AFC East, so you're going to get a lot of winnable games there. You get 2 games against the Rams. It's, to me, I still think there's a lot of games on there that they could win, especially towards the back half of their schedule, which is going to really help them out. I mean, you play Buffalo, but that's at home. I mean, people say Buffalo is going to be the division favorite, but they have to travel across the country for a Monday Night Football game. You get Washington. You get a couple of these other teams down the stretch. I'm not so, as a Jimmy G fan, I'm not sold on his ability just yet. I think he's a great quarterback. He can manage the game really well. But in terms of what you're asking him to do, and granted, they were 6 minutes away from winning the Super Bowl. But then everything kind of fell apart, and they were also just playing the most potent offense in the NFL over the past 10 years. I think it's going to be harder for them this year. The teams around them, especially in the NFC as a whole, got better. There's not as much as this gap that a lot of people said there was going to be. I don't know. I don't know if they're going to win this division, Ryan. They'll probably make the playoffs, but I don't know if this team's going to win this division.
I really think they can. So you bring up, there's a couple of things I want to bring up. Garoppolo, I need to preface this by saying he had the second lowest ADOT, which is the average depth of throw. So basically how far his passes are going past the line of scrimmage. He had the second lowest mark in the league last year among qualified passers, which was 6.5 yards. Drew Brees was the lowest. I think he was at 6.4. Despite that, as I said, I need to preface by saying this, his completion percentage over expected was 1.7%, which was 9th in the league. So as long as he kind of doesn't make any crucial mistakes, he's a good guy to have in this Kyle Shanahan offense, especially because the way Shanahan schemes his offenses, I'm not going to say it takes pressure off of Jimmy, but it makes his life a little easier. And going to their schedule last year, it definitely, it was the third place schedule, but they had a tough stretch that they kind of passed. They throttled Green Bay, was this week 12, 37-8. They was probably one of the better NFL regular season games last year. They played Baltimore. They lose that game. It was that dropped them to 10-2, but that was a 20-17 loss. It was very close. They were competitive throughout. And then they beat New Orleans in another one of the best NFL games last season, that shootout, 48-46. That was a fun game to watch, week 14. So they're playing more. I'd say they have a few more challenging teams this year, but still, when they did play challenging teams last year, they did show up. And listen, I was on your side up until I had to write this preview. I was like, I don't really think they were a 13-3 team. I'm not sold on Garoppolo. They'll probably win enough games to make it into the playoffs, but they're going to regress. But Matt, I'll tell you, the more I looked at this team and this roster, taking into account like all these different factors, I'm excited. I'm all in. I'm all in on this team. I really think that they have as good a chance as anybody's had in recent years to make back-to-back Super Bowl appearances in the NFC. I really do.
I mean, we've seen Kyle Shanahan do this in the Super Bowl not once but twice to squander a lead. Obviously, he had a couple other factors that why it happened in Atlanta. I just think there's other teams that are getting better. I mean, I don't know if Tampa Bay is going to really make a case this year, but I think it's, as we said, it's kind of now or never for this New Orleans team to really make a move. And you look at Seattle, obviously there's some question marks there we're going to talk about, but the NFC is still competitive. And even if they get to the Super Bowl, Ryan, I don't think they could keep up offensively with Baltimore or Kansas City. So it's the style that they play. I don't know if they're going to kind of change things up this year. They had a couple injuries to their wide receivers last year at some points too. As a Jimmy Garoppolo fan, I hope they do well. I think the NFL is better off when the 49ers are good. The same breath as the Cowboys as well. So I think they'll win games. I think they can by default win this division as long as they play well against Seattle. But in terms of deep playoff runs, I'm not as confident as you are.
Speaking of Seattle, that's the next team we'll talk about. Once again, they win double-digit games last year in the regular season. Once again, they find themselves out in the divisional round because they don't know how to run their offense, at least in my opinion. That's my personal opinion. They clearly, the Jamal Adams trade obviously makes the defense a lot better. They have a pretty good secondary there now with Shaquille Griffin, Quentin Dunbar, Trey Flowers as your cornerbacks. You have Jamal Adams, who's not just a safety. He can do a lot of different things for that team, whether he's playing deep, whether he's playing in the box. He can do a lot of different things for Ken Norton on the defensive side over there for Seattle. Offensively, you have a pretty solid wide receiver group that's led by DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. And they did bring in Greg Olsen. I don't really know how much of an impact that's going to make. I don't know how much Olsen has left. It's just, I wasn't a huge fan of that, but maybe they see something that I don't. I'll give them credit for trying to at least improve their offensive line. I don't know quite how it's going to go, but at least they're trying to bring some new guys in there that maybe won't be awful. And then you have a nice running back group, with Chris Carson. It's my guy, Chris Carson. He helped me to a fantasy championship last year, not to brag, but he did. And then you have Russell Wilson, one of the elite quarterbacks, one of the very few elite quarterbacks in the NFL right now. And I said it in my preview. I'm going to say it now. If this team doesn't want to get eliminated early in the playoffs, they need to let Russ cook. They need to hashtag let Russ cook. That's the only way that this team is going to get back to the Super Bowl. It's obviously been a while since this team's been there. That's the only way they're going to do it. You have an elite quarterback. You need to use him. You can't just wait until the fourth quarter to let him pull magic out of a hat. You need to let him do his thing. You need to let him do it early. I can understand why Pete Carroll and Brian Schottenheimer are trying to go run heavy out there, but that's not how they're going to win. They're going to win by letting Russ do what he does best, and that's leading this team.
I mean, I hope they go run heavy because I have Chris Carson on both my fantasy teams. But in regards to Russell Wilson, Ryan, I kind of am leaning to agree with you. This is one of the better wide receiving cores, and I'll count Greg Olsen in this too, that Russell Wilson has had in Seattle. They've kind of made a living out of winning with not household names on the offensive side outside of Russell Wilson. Dating back to when Marshawn Lynch kind of faded out, not too many people knew like the Paul Richardsons of the world, even like Golden Tate. These aren't the same kind of illustrious players like a Michael Thomas or Julio Jones. Yeah, another team when you kind of compare it to the Packers and Aaron Rodgers, where you have such an elite quarterback, but they're not always put in the best situation to succeed. I do agree Russell Wilson's probably the single-handed reason why he's carried this team to multiple playoff appearances. They're also a product of the environment they play in the sense that they have this raucous stadium and the ability to have such a home field advantage. That advantage is going to be taken completely out this year. So that'll level the playing field for a lot of teams, Ryan, that are going to come in there. And I'll use New England as an example. A team that was kind of shaky going in, looked like a win for Seattle with that environment on like a Sunday Night Football atmosphere. But that playing field's kind of leveled out now. So a lot of those games that they could bank on against the fringe level teams in the middle of the pack, they're going to have to go out there and play and win now because it's going to be a totally different vibe up there in terms of stadium atmosphere. I think that'll play a major, major, major factor, more so for a team like Seattle than Kansas City at Arrowhead because they have the much better team. Seattle thrives and plays up to the crowd when they're at home. They don't have that this year. We don't know for the full season. Whatever it is, there's a portion of their schedule where it's going to be no fans or very little fans, and that's going to really affect, I think, how this team plays. So It could be a playoff team for sure. I think it depends on how Arizona is. It depends on how good San Francisco is this year. But they could. It's another one of those rosters that kind of doesn't make sense to me on the offensive side. You got Russell Wilson, you have Chris Carson, Tyler Lockett. I think is going to have a pretty good year. It's just a weird, interesting mix of players because you bring in Greg Olson, as you mentioned, the couple guys on the line they brought in, but I don't know. I think they're really going to hurt from this lack of crowd noise. They really are.
No, you want to talk about stadium effects? The Los Angeles Rams are moving into a brand new stadium in Inglewood, California, SoFi Stadium, and there won't be any fans there to break it in. The Rams last season go 9-7 a year after going 13-3 and making the Super Bowl before they lost to the Patriots. They couldn't really be consistent last year for a number of reasons. They brought in a new offensive coordinator and Kevin O'Connell. He was formerly with Washington. They bring in Brandon Staley as their new defensive coordinator. He was with the Broncos. I don't know, man. I said this in my preview too. They just seem kind of mediocre. They seem stuck in the middle. They don't seem good enough to contend. They're not bad enough to get a good draft pick. Not that it would matter because they don't have their first round pick next year. They traded it to Jacksonville for Jalen Ramsey, who coincidentally just signed a contract shortly before we started doing this episode. They signed him 5 years, $105 million. Now you have Goff on that awful extension. You still have Aaron Donald locked up for a while. You just gave Ramsey that 5-year extension. So this team is kind of capped out for the foreseeable future. As I said, they'll probably be somewhere around 500. Maybe they get a win over, maybe they get a win under, but this just isn't a very impressive team for me. As I've said it before, the NFL Saints were not for long. Just a couple of years ago, this was one of the more talented rosters in all of football, and now they might be the least talented team in their own division when you look at the rosters on paper. So I'm not too high on the Rams this year personally. I think it's probably going to take them a couple of years until they can get some cap flexibility, until they can get some new guys in there that might actually help. I mean, they bring in Leonard Floyd, they drafted Cam Akers. Apparently Van Jefferson is getting some rave reviews in camp, but I really don't think any of that matters. This roster doesn't inspire a lot of confidence, especially based on the division that they're in.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of money tied up in some guys that you could kind of sit there and say, is it kind of worth the money compared to what we could use that money for? I mean, obviously, Aaron Donald is worth every penny you're going to pay him, but you look at a guy in Jared Goff, who I think is a pretty decent quarterback, but in terms of what you're trying to do, I don't know how dynamic he's going to be. Jalen Ramsey, after making a trade for him and trying to justify all that they gave up to get him, you kind of have to pay him that money. Again, you could take that money and kind of filter it down into a lot of other positions. Yeah, mediocre is the correct word. There's nothing that's really exciting about this team other than Aaron Donald. There's only so much, in my opinion, that Sean McVay could really do with this offense, especially when you're starting to kind of lose guys from year to year. Obviously, no Gurley. You don't have Brandon Cooks anymore. Some of these guys are starting to kind of filter out as opposed to come in. So it's going to be interesting to see what he does with this team. I'm willing to agree with you that this will probably be the fourth team in this division. I think there are three better teams than them. They are used to playing in an empty stadium, though, so that might help their cause. But yeah, you have like Andrew Whitworth, who's like 60 years old, who's out there still playing. It's just a weird team. I agree, though. I think it's going to take a couple years. I know you're not a huge fan of Jared Goff, but I think depending on the situation you put him in, you're banking on Cam Akers having a pretty good year. If he has a good year, Goff has a pretty decent year, and the offense is kind of solid, I could kind of make the case to where they'd be pretty decent. But yeah, there's just three better teams in that division than the Rams.
And that third better team that we have yet to talk about, we're saving who I personally feel is the best for last. It's the Arizona Cardinals. They were my pick to win this division in my divisional preview. I said that they could go 11-5 and win the NFC West this year. I'm sorry, excuse me. This is a very trendy team right now in all circles of the league, from executives to coaches to analysts on television stations and podcasts. This is the team that everyone likes to talk about. Since 2002, since the divisional realignment took place, there have only been 2 years where a team has not gone from worst to first in their division, and coincidentally, one of those was last year. But I think that if any team is going to do it this year, I think Arizona has the best chance to do it. This is going to be a very fun team. I think it's going to be one of the most fun teams we've seen in a while. The talent that they have on offense is towards the top of the league. Their offensive line, I think, could still use a little work, but you obviously bring in DeAndre Hopkins in that big deal where you're also able to get off of David Johnson's contract somehow, so good for them. You have Christian Kirk. Larry Fitzgerald is still there. You have a nice group of running backs with Kenyon Drake, Chase Edmonds. Kyler Murray, I think, is set to take a big step forward this year. I saw some positive things from him passing the ball last year. He still has some stuff to improve upon, but I think with the team around him, he'll be able to do that in his second year. Max Williams as the tight end, I think that's a pretty good position to be in. And then defensively, last year they were very, very bad, but towards the end of the season, they kind of started to put things together. And I think Vance Joseph, especially with the pieces that he has now, he'll be able to use them the way that he wants. And I think this defense, even if they're just average, that's all that they need to be. And I think you bring in Isaiah Simmons, who was literally the perfect guy that this defense needed. They were awful against tight ends last year, so he'll be able to do that. He'll be able to do a lot of other things, but he'll definitely be able to help out with that. Budda Baker is one of the better young safeties in the entire league. I think their group of cornerbacks is pretty solid. You still have Patrick Peterson there. You have Murphy. Chandler Jones on the line is one of the more underrated players in football. I think he finally started getting recognition last year that he deserved, but still he's a little underrated. I'm excited to see what this team can do. They have I'd say the start to their season's pretty tough. You have 4 winnable games sandwiched in between games against San Francisco, Dallas, and Seattle. But if they can just kind of get their way through that, if they can win the games that they need to, maybe steal one against one of those 3 teams, they're going to be in an excellent position to make a run following their Week 8 bye. I really cannot wait to see what Cliff Kingsbury and this team do in 2020.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up Chandler Jones, a guy who had tremendous success in New England and then was traded out there and then kind of got lost in the national media doesn't really recognize the Arizona Cardinals as part of the National Football League. So pretty much any good player that's kind of came through, and you even look at a guy like Patrick Peterson, who has had just a spectacular career, but the casual NFL fan's not going to see it because they're buried in that 405 slot on Fox almost every single week. Chandler Jones is a guy who I think is one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. Just if you look at his stats and you look at his tape, I think it speaks for itself. And then you add in guys like Devondre Campbell too, and they've drafted pretty well over the past couple of years too. I mean, Hassan Reddick, a guy who was pretty high coming out of Temple. Then you have obviously this year with Isaiah Simmons. It'll be fun to watch them. I don't know. This is another team like Atlanta to where I don't know, because of the division they're in, if they're going to really compete to win it. I know you have them winning it. I think they could possibly sneak into a wild card berth. They're a team like, not necessarily Detroit, they're better than Detroit, but a team like Detroit that could sneak in to that last spot. I think this is a great position to be in, especially having Hopkins and Kirk, Kenyon Drake. It's a solid core, really is. And now that Kingsbury has kind of this mold of what he wants to do, and we talked about it from the Texans side on Sunday, Ryan. This was highway robbery. Not only do you get rid of Johnson's contract, you get rid of him on your roster altogether. Then you bring in a true number 1 receiver, because Larry Fitzgerald, let's face it, isn't one anymore. So you bring him in there. You have Hopkins. Literally, you can't ask for pretty much anything more if you're a second-year quarterback of Kyler Murray. You bring in arguably the best receiver in football in DeAndre Hopkins to complement a nice underneath throw in Kirk, and then you have Kenyon Drake. Yeah, I've been coming around to them more so in recent weeks, for sure. They're like the Dolphins in the NFC for me. I'm starting to come around to them more and more. So yeah, I could see this. It's a very, very real possibility to me. So I really can. If not this year, Ryan, then in a year or two, because Seattle is going this way. So I think Arizona could kind of take that number 2 spot in the worst case scenario if Seattle, if Pete Carroll just can't figure this out. But Arizona's right there. I think Cliff Kingsbury, Kyler Murray didn't get enough credit in some regards. A lot of people doubted him. Some people say Kyler Murray's too short, can't see over the offensive line. I don't think you really need to when you have DeAndre Hopkins running down the field. So I think it's the perfect fit. And I think he realizes, too, it's the perfect fit there. He'll be in a system where he's appreciated for sure. So, yeah, I'm excited. I agree that the line needs some work, though, but they'll get there. It'll be exciting.
So that concludes our NFL preview. 32 whole teams we got through. Did AFC in part 1, NFC in this part. And if you still want more, there's a lot more that we have over at bestaavailableplayer.com. We had 8 different people, including myself and Matt, do a divisional preview in written form. So go check out that over on the site. We had 8 different people. We started with Ross Anderson in the AFC East. Zach Cosenza, the AFC North. Billy O'Neill did the AFC South. Joey Colonna did the AFC West. Then we moved over to the NFC, where Noah Prochel did the East. David Austin Guest did the North. Matt did the South. And my West preview just went up today. Tomorrow, or I guess when you're listening to this on Thursday, it could be right now if you go over to the site. You should see our staff predictions for the NFL. We got 19 people who responded to our NFL staff survey. So you'll see who our staff thinks is going to win all the divisions in football, who they think is going to win the AFC, the NFC, the Super Bowl, all the major awards like MVP, Offensive Player of the Year, all that jazz. So definitely take a look at that, and that'll conclude our NFL preview. I'd say, 8 or 9 day NFL preview over at bestaavailableplayer.com. The Halper Bros are plowing through their NFL previews as well. They just put up the second part of their NFL preview where they looked at the AFC East and the AFC South. And now in their newest episode, which will already be up on the site, you can check it out. They will be taking a look at the NFC North and the AFC and the NFC West. And then finally, they will end in part 4 of their preview with the NFC East and the NFC South. So definitely go check all that out. All the information you guys need to be prepared to take a look and be able to watch the NFL here in 2020. I know with everything going on in the world, maybe you guys just weren't able to get as prepared as you normally are. No need to fear. All the information you need is over at bestaavailableplayer.com in multiple different formats. So we did Pops My Tarts in Monday's episode. So we are going to do Start Bench Cut in this one. And this is a fiery one. This was one that we kind of discussed a little bit in a Discord call last night. That we got we got into a little bit of a debate, so we wanted to save most of it for this. It's breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I know me and Matt already disagree. I know what his order is. So, Matt, I'll let you go first. What are you gonna start, bench, and cut out of breakfast, lunch, and dinner?
I'm gonna start lunch. I think lunch is by far the most versatile meal of the day. Definitely the most important meal to me. I look forward to it the most, especially when I used to be at school. Lunch is kind of this cool thing when you get to see, who's around, let's go grab lunch, let's go get a sandwich. Nothing beats a sub at like 12:30 in the afternoon on a Wednesday. Nothing beats a sub. Just chips and a nice little drink on the side. It's by far the best. Not a better feeling in the world. Lunch is versatile too. You can make it for business meetings. You could do a lunch date. You could do all kinds of things with lunch. You could just go out to lunch with your friends. You could eat lunch anywhere. You could have leftovers for lunch. You could buy a lunch. You could do anything. By far the most versatile meal of the day. I'm going to bench dinner. Dinner, another great option too. More so formal in my regards. Hard to find an informal dinner. You're either sitting with your family, extended family for holidays, or maybe it's like a dinner date. Going out to dinner with a team or whatever. Dinner is usually a little more formal, but you get a lot of good meals with that too. Sometimes, depending on what you eat, it's going to sit heavy in your stomach, so you got to watch for that. Not so much with lunch because you could just get a sandwich and be good. And I'm going to bench breakfast. Who eats breakfast? Who? Tony the Tiger? That's it? I'm not going to eat breakfast. I usually skip it. I wake up at 11:30 anyway. It takes me 2 hours to get hungry after I wake up anyway. So no thanks. Cutting breakfast. Sorry, Tony. Not doing it. What are you going to eat for breakfast, Ryan? Are you going to have a sugary cereal? That's what the kids do these days, and then you just have all that sugar in you at 7:30 in the morning. So no, I'm cutting breakfast.
Lunch is the most useless meal during the day. Nobody needs to eat lunch. I can't tell you the last time I had lunch. I'm cutting lunch if it's not already clear. I think it's a stupid meal. Just do something else. That's not a meal. I'm going to start breakfast. I think breakfast, you hear that it's the most important meal of the day. That's not why I'm choosing it. I'm choosing just because you got so many options for breakfast, especially it doesn't end. There's so many different avenues you can go down for what you want to do for breakfast. It's easily the best meal of the day. I'm always happy when I'm eating breakfast. I'm going to bench dinner, and the right is, Matt, you kind of alluded to it, in the right kind of context situation, dinner's always very nice, but even still, it's the same thing with breakfast. There's a lot of different ways you can go with dinner. I've always been a big dinner guy as well, but yeah, it's just, I'm not a big fan of lunch. I think there's no point to it.
So you're telling me
in the day.
You're telling me when we used to go out to lunch, all the crew at Hawk TV and the X, I would come by every day and say, lunch, and we'd all go and get like a sandwich or a sub, go to Brennan's or somewhere, have a nice sandwich. That's the best meal of the day. You're hungry, you just finished the first half of your day, you want to sit and scroll through your phone and see, who the Flyers cut or something, or what, a recap of who the Phillies are losing to. You have lunch, it's great. You have a nice sandwich.
It's a very overrated meal in my opinion. It's just very overrated.
There's a lot of businesses that thrive on lunch, Ryan. That
I'm sure. I know. Listen, I know, but I would do an early dinner before I do lunch. Like, I would put early dinner ahead of lunch. I would put brunch ahead of lunch. Because you're going to be lunch on its own is just, it's boring. No, because you're gonna, if you do
an early dinner, you're gonna be hungry again at 10 o'clock at night. You're gonna have to do second dinner.
Well, that's fine. I'll take second dinner over lunch. Lunch it's stupid.
Why? You don't want to go. The best is when someone shoots you a text and says, "You want to go to lunch?" That's the best text you could ever get. Or when your coworker looks at you and says, "Lunch, and then that's the mutual agreement. You get up from your desk or get out of class, whatever, and you go for a nice walk. Get a nice Italian sub. Get a little oil on it, some vinegar. Get a bag of Lay's potato chips and a nice water. That's a great meal right there. And then you go about your day. By far the best meal of the day. Love it.
That was Start Bench Cut.
You're still upset.
This might be my Pops My Tarts on Sunday. You'll have to wait and see. People that like lunch, but this was fun. We learned a lot. We bonded. We did not have lunch. We recorded this during the lunch period of the day.
I had lunch.
But we'll see. I didn't have lunch because I think it's useless. But that'll do it for Best Available Podcast, Episode 5. Just be sure to stay over on the site, not even just for all the NFL stuff that I talked about a few minutes ago, but we have so many other things going up. We got another episode of Entry Level Experience coming soon within the next day. We got Soundtown, episode number 2. I think they interviewed Sal from Elephant Jake, so definitely be on the lookout for that. He's an awesome guy. I remember meeting him at a Rock and Raise that we did at Hawk TV a couple years ago, and he's awesome. His band Elephant Jake is awesome, but I'm not going to spoil anything else. Go listen to them and then go listen to that podcast. And it won't be a waste of your time like lunch will be, trust me. But that'll be Best Available Podcast, Episode 5. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week. We'll talk about NFL Week 1 recap. We'll get some other sports in there this time too. We'll get back to all the sports. We'll talk about a little hockey, We'll get some other stuff in there too. Surely we'll get an interview going soon. We got a guy that we're targeting that we think you guys are going to have a lot of fun listening to. He's very knowledgeable. He does a lot of different things. Just an overall great guy, really. So be on the lookout for that. That should be coming soon. But we want to thank you for listening to the 5th episode of Best Available Podcasts, and we'll see you guys again soon.